David Damrosch's book, Comparing the Literatures, primarily focuses on the discipline of comparative literature itself, rather than comparing specific literary texts or national literatures. Damrosch advocates for comparative literature as a scholarly alternative or supplement to a narrow and monolingual focus on a single national literature. While he appreciates René Ediembel's defense of literary scholars participating in discussions on works written in unfamiliar languages, Damrosch implicitly encourages those interested in comparative literature to immerse themselves in a variety of languages and cultures from both the Western and Eastern traditions. Throughout the book, Damrosch promotes the idea of comparative literature as a vibrant, transnational, and multilingual discipline. The book begins by tracing the lineage of comparative literature to the first Oriental library, established by the Chinese monk Xuanzang in 645 CE. Damrosch recognizes the similarities between Xuanzang's practices and the work of Renaissance scholars in Europe, who were influenced by established philological traditions in India and Japan. He highlights these instances of cross-fertilization between the East and the West as foundational to the emergence of comparative scholarship, particularly in Western Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. Damrosch identifies Johann Gottfried Herder's treatise on the origin of language, 1772, as a pivotal document for comparative literature. He counters early criticisms of Herder, arguing that Herder did not reject the study of one's national literature, but rather advocated for its exploration, as long as scholars avoided nationalistic biases. Damrosch interprets Herder's stance as promoting a nationalist internationalism. The term comparative literature first appeared in 1886 in the title of a book by H. M. Posnet, an Irishman. Damrosch also notes that Hugo Meltzel, a Transylvanian comparatist, had already established a journal of comparative literature called Acta Comparationis Literarum Universarum. However, one issue with the journal was that early contributors were overly eager to praise their respective national traditions, and there was a tendency for the so-called major languages to dominate the discourse. Recognizing that a history of comparative literature may appear dry to some readers, David Damrosch incorporates brief accounts of certain comparatists' lives to demonstrate their intertwined relationship with their critical practices. For example, he discusses Lillian First, a Jewish-American comparatist who fled the Nazis and questioned the notion of home in her work. He also explores Leo Spitzer's troubled European past, which influenced his interpretation of a passage from Rabelais. Damrosch suggests that both First and Spitzer, living in exile, engaged in a form of resistance philology, where their emotional responses to literature were often rooted in trauma, reflecting the experience of many comparatists as a migrant discipline. Damrosch acknowledges the tendency among émigré comparatists to ignore their own national literatures and focus on a small number of European countries, particularly England, France, and Germany. He aptly labels this as a form of linguistic imperialism. To counter such biases, he cites South Asian expert Sheldon Pollock's call for comparison without hegemony. Damrosch is aware of Eastern scholars who criticize comparative literature for privileging Western texts and theories. He highlights Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak's development of deconstructive feminism in her reading and commentary on Mahasweta Devi's short story Draupadi, which she approaches in the original language. He also mentions Revathi Krishnaswamy, who suggests that scholars should explore the theorizing within literary texts themselves. Krishnaswamy provides an example of theory in literature through his analysis of Valmiki's epic Ramayana, focusing on a fictional Kronka hen's lament and its metrical and syllabic patterning, which align with a non-Western aesthetic, and the Indian theory of poetic creation as an intensely social act. David Damrosch suggests that authors from Southeast Asia may benefit from some form of Western connection, even if they are not relying on Western theory or knowledge of Western literary traditions. He illustrates this by comparing the critical attention received by Indonesian novelist Pramoedya Anantatur's Buru Quartet and Thai Buddhist writer Kukrit Pramaj's Four Rains, which, despite being written in a similar style and equally effective in rendering political history, have received vastly different levels of recognition. Damrosch attributes this disparity to Pramoedya's work being championed by Western political scientist Benedict Anderson, who had a significant influence in promoting his writings. He also mentions the case of Yukio Mishima, whose fiction quickly gained attention and benefited from Western critics, comparing it to the works of Nietzsche, Mann, and Proust, allowing Mishima to be considered within Western notions of literary modernity. Damrosch's point here emphasizes the importance of reading literary works in their original language, rather than relying solely on translations, and the influence of Western figures in shaping the reception and recognition of authors. In the conclusion of the book, titled Rebirth of a Discipline, Damrosch reflects on a painting titled Discussing the Divine Comedy with Dante by artists Dai Dudu, Li Tiezi, and Zhang An. The painting features 100 well-known figures from both the East and the West, symbolizing the integration of different cultures and literatures in comparative literature. Damrosch likens the observers in the painting to contemporary comparatists, examining the diverse panorama of literatures. The painting serves as a compelling analogy for the discipline of comparative literature, bridging the divide between East and West, and transcending barriers between the national and the global.